Ukraine has done something unbelievable with its ground drones. In this video, we explore how Ukraine is using these new tools to devastate Russian forces, as well as the impact that unmanned ground vehicles, or UGVs, could have on the war. First, we head to Vovchansk. An ancient city first settled under the Tsardom of Russia in 1674, Vovchansk is part of the Kharkiv region. Before the war began, it had a population of 17,459. Now that population is about 300. The reason is that Vovchansk has been a key Russian target during its offensive in Kyiv. What was once a small, though vibrant city has been reduced to rubble by constant bombardments of Russian artillery and bombs. Yet it's also in Vovchansk that Ukraine has unleashed a weapon unlike anything that Russia has ever seen. In May 2024, Russia launched a new ground offensive targeting the city of Kharkiv. It advanced quickly, taking several small border villages before arriving in Vovchansk. The small city is only 25 miles away from Kharkiv and serves as perhaps the biggest barrier to the true Russian target. It was in Vovchansk that Ukraine's forces fortified and stood their ground. The 82nd Air Assault Brigade, along with several other Ukrainian brigades, arrived to halt the Russian soldiers. Weeks of hard fighting ensued. By the end, Ukraine had pushed Russia's soldiers to the Vovcha River that runs through Vovchansk. Russia rallied. It took the PJSC Volchansky chemical plant located on the river's right bank, with the apparent goal of using the plant as a launching point for a river crossing into the city's southern regions. The plan failed. Ukraine smartly attacked the plant from the west, essentially surrounding the Russians stationed in the plant and isolating them from the other Russian soldiers stationed in the west. No evacuations were possible. No reinforcements would arrive. When the Russian soldiers in the chemical plant realized their situation, they surrendered in their dozens. A sad showing for a military that's meant to have overwhelming power and superior tactics. But what does this have to do with drones? It all comes down to the chemical plant. By capturing it, Russia gave itself an elevated position through which it could observe almost the entirety of the small city it aimed to capture. It had a strong defensive position set up. Ukraine's attack from the plant's west was an example of its soldiers identifying a key vulnerability in that defensive position and exploiting it. However, it was an attack that wouldn't have been possible were it not for a very clever usage of a UGV. Surrounding the Russians in that plant wasn't as simple as it sounds. Ukraine's Air Force was initially called in to launch guided bomb strikes on the plant to dislodge the Russians. Those strikes failed, not because the bombs weren't effective, but because Ukraine simply didn't have enough of them to sustain the attack. Bombardments using aerial drones proved similarly ineffectual. Though Ukraine has made good use of kamikaze and bomb-carrying drones throughout the war, they simply didn't offer the firepower required. The explosive charges these drones carry weren't powerful enough to breach the chemical plant's defenses, so Ukraine's soldiers got creative. Facing the challenge of decimating the Russian firing positions at the plant to enable its soldiers to storm Russia's defenses, Ukraine turned to salvage. Electric cars, primarily imported from abroad, were their targets. The wrecks of these vehicles provided batteries and alternators that could sustain the drones Ukraine used to batter the Russian position. But they had another use. During the salvage operation, Ukrainian troops discovered an undamaged hydrogen canister inside the wreckage of a Toyota Mirai. Weighing over 440 pounds, that canister offered far greater explosive potential than the UAVs Ukraine had previously used to attack the chemical plant with. With it, Ukraine could launch a weapon comparable to the most devastating aerial bombs. Powerful blast waves, fireballs, and even a mushroom cloud could erupt from this hydrogen canister, vaporizing the Russian firing position and opening the door for the plant to be retaken. There was just one problem. Ukraine had no way to launch its jerry-rigged bomb. Its planes had already been diverted away from the chemical plant, called to provide support elsewhere. As for its UAVs, none were large enough to carry the hydrogen canister. Even if they were, the sheer size of the canister would make it an easy target for the Russians stationed in the plant. Ukraine had a battle-ending weapon in its hands and no way to use it, so the soldiers turned to a ground drone. Packing the canister onto the drone, they sent it across the remnants of a partially destroyed bridge in Metallista Street. This was a genius move. The bridge lay just to the east of the plant, which would have made it detectable to the Russian troops were it not for the extensive tree cover standing between the plant and the bridge. Inching along the bridge, which was just about wide enough to traverse, the drone slowly moved toward the nearest building in the chemical plant. As it drew closer, the Ukrainians triggered the hydrogen canister strapped to the drone. Boom! A huge explosion rocked the building, with the fire that followed suggesting Ukraine had just taken out an ammo store. That alone would have been devastating enough for the Russian soldiers stationed in the plant. However, the building the Ukrainian drone targeted was also the sole firing position the Russians had set up. With that building now in flames, the troops were forced to evacuate before linking up with soldiers stationed elsewhere in the plant to launch a counteroffensive. Every Russian turned their attention to the flaming building, anticipating a Ukrainian assault to come through the wreckage. That assault came, but not from the direction the Russian soldiers anticipated. Ukraine had used its ground-based drone bomb as a distraction as well as a means to take out Russia's only firing position in the chemical plant. With the Russians distracted, Ukraine was free to send soldiers along Sobonaya Street, which had previously been impossible because Russia had eyes on it via their firing position. The undefended street was taken. The Russian soldiers inside the chemical plant lost their key supply route as they watched what little ammo they had burn around them. It wasn't long after that the Ukrainian soldiers had surrounded the Russians inside the still blazing chemical plant, forcing mass surrenders and putting paid to Putin's latest attempt to take Vovchansk. And it was all done using a drone only barely larger than an RC car and a repurposed hydrogen tank from a wrecked vehicle. A single stroke of genius that has unlocked a new tactic for Ukraine. It no longer needs to throw men at Russian positions. It also doesn't need to rely on foreign aid to provide the bombs and missiles it needs to strike fortified positions. Through a combination of guile, ingenuity, and superior tactics, Ukraine now has a weapon that can cause severe damage wherever it's deployed. It's opened up a new frontier in the Ukraine war, and the craziest thing about this amazing strike is that it's far from the first instance of Ukraine using ground-based drones against Russia. There are many more. While the attack on Vovchansk chemical plant may be the most impressive example of Ukraine using the combination of RC cars and bombs to wreak havoc on Russia, the tactic was merely an explosive extension of a concept Ukraine has used for well over a year. In July 2023, Reuters reported on the developers of new ground-based drones. Scattered throughout the country, Ukrainian engineers have been developing variations of these drones, many using salvaged parts. One of these engineers is 22-year-old Yevhen Natok. His design is a small, almost undetectable, green machine that runs on tracks. It would look like a small model tank, were it not for the fact that it has a landmine strapped to its back. Where the jerry-rigged ground drone used in Vovchansk took advantage of tree cover to reach a Russian position, Natok's drone is far more difficult to spot. Some long grass is all it needs to make its way to a Russian position. Once the drone gets in close, it's all over. If they see it at this distance, they won't even have time to pray, Natok told Reuters when speaking about his drone. And he's not stopping at mines. Natok has created ground drones of various sizes and capabilities. The smallest can be packed with explosives or have mines strapped to them. However, he's also built drones capable of carrying remote-controlled machine guns up to 6 miles away from the drone's operator. In July 2023, he was also working on a much larger variation of his drone that will be capable of carrying a 20mm cannon capable of firing rounds that can penetrate tank armor. Russia has already lost over 8,000 tanks in the war. The arrival of tiny vehicles those tanks can't properly see or target could be devastating for Putin's forces. Imagine a small fleet of drones carrying 20mm cannons, blasting holes in tanks, while even smaller drones lurk in the long grass, waiting to explode as a Russian battalion is thrown into chaos. That's the potential that these ground drones present: devastating firepower and explosive force, all used by Ukrainian troops that are literally miles away from the fighting. The Sun provides more insight into Natok's innovative drone on its YouTube channel. The footage shows another variation of the machine, this time with chunky wheels, moving through a field. It's about the size of a large RC car with a camouflaged mine strapped to the top. The footage switches to a first-person view, demonstrating that there's a small camera built into the drone that allows the operator to track and control its movements. Natok firmly believes his drones are game changers. "I will tell you this, if we had these kinds of drones at the beginning of the full-scale war, the Russians would have been met on every road," he tells The Sun. Convoys wouldn't have stood a chance, he says. The drones would have been stationed in every tree line, out of the sight of invading Russian troops, until their tanks and armored vehicles drew near. Then, an attack. The drones would pour out en masse and detonate, leaving behind them a wreckage of tanks, armored vehicles, and the unfortunate Russian soldiers caught in their wake. It's difficult to argue with Natok's point. The drones he's created are difficult to spot, but even if they're noticed, they're small and fast enough to evade rifle fire. That only makes them more terrifying for Russian soldiers. Imagine seeing what looks like an RC car hurtling towards your position. It takes your brain a moment to figure out what this quickly moving little car is, and a moment longer to identify that it's carrying an explosive. In the seconds it takes you to aim and fire your rifle, the drone has closed the distance and is almost at your position. Even a direct hit will result in a devastating explosion, but you have to fire. If you don't, the car is just going to reach you and explode anyway. If that isn't worrying enough for Russia, Natok isn't the only engineer working on new ways to use drones to attack Russian positions. He is just one of many engineers coming up with new concepts to counter Putin's use of tank and trench-based warfare. In a World War II-style ground war, it appears that innovation is going to lead the way to Ukrainian victory. Take the trench-busting drones Ukraine has devised as even more examples. In April 2024, footage emerged showing Ukrainian forces using yet another variation of a UGV to attack Russia, posted by the 63rd Mechanized Brigade. The video shows a drone traversing over slightly uneven terrain en route to a Russian trench. The tiny vehicle makes its way into the trench before there's a pause. Then, an explosion. The footage continues to show several more of these drones, each following the same strategy. They move, often using grass as cover, but sometimes traveling out in the open, until they arrive at a trench. Explosion after explosion is shown, with trenches collapsing in on themselves under the force. These drones are called Rattle-S, and they're similar to both NATO's mine-sporting drones and the kamikaze UAVs Ukraine has put to such good use throughout the war. They're also not the only drones Ukraine is using to tackle the Russian trench challenge. September 2024 brought with it news of yet another UGV variation, this one dubbed the Fury. Was first shown off in May 2024, with the UGV being a four-wheeler, approximately the same size as a shopping cart. Equipped with a machine gun, it essentially acts like a mini tank. In September, Ukraine successfully deployed the Fury for the first time in the Kursk Oblast that it invaded back in August. The vehicle successfully dodged mines planted around the trench, eventually reaching the Russian position with the aid of mortar fire and other explosive drones. Once in position, the machine gun sprayed. The result? Part of the enemy was destroyed, the rest fled, claimed the 1st Detachment of the 8th Special Purpose Regiment stationed in Kursk. This UGV variation will be even more terrifying to Russia because it's durable. The 1st Detachment claims that it took several hits from first-person drones and Russian RPGs and still managed to reach its target, kill several Russians, and then drive back to base for recovery. Forbes provided more details about this drone, saying that it's built with thick armor to protect its most vulnerable components. It also comes with a video camera, enabling an operator to see where the drone is going, as well as a radio that the operator can use to deliver orders. The military liked that it was easy to control, noted Ukraine's Innovation Minister Mikhailo Fedorov. He also pointed out that the drone has good sight and automatic fire both day and night. So where does all of this leave Russia? The hydrogen bomb-deploying drone in Vovchansk is just one of many. Ukraine is building fleets of smaller UGVs carrying mines, machine guns, and even cannons. It's using those drones to punch holes in Russian defenses, all without having to worry about losing a single soldier to the fighting. Russia is no longer merely fighting Ukrainian troops. It has to face up to an emerging robot army that's difficult to spot, even more difficult to hit, and capable of devastating defenses if it's allowed to get close. And with Vovchansk, Ukraine may now be realizing the true capabilities of its innovative UGVs. Mines and small explosives are just the start. The wreckages of the vehicles, littered throughout the country, may hide components and hydrogen tanks it can use to break through Russian fortifications. So we come to a key question. Why are these UGVs game changers for Ukraine? We've already touched on a handful of reasons. Ukraine's ground drones are often incredibly difficult to detect, with many of them being so small that they're barely visible in high grass and can easily hide in tree lines. The lack of detectability opens the door for Ukraine to use these drones to coordinate ambushes, as seen in Vovchansk and with the trench-busting drones this year. Being difficult to detect also means Ukraine's UGVs are excellent support tools. Again, Vovchansk proves this. A drone was able to sneak toward the most important building in a captured chemical plant, decimating it with an explosion and destroying Russian ammunition stocks while taking out a key firing position. That alone weakened the Russian troops stationed in the plant. They had to deal with the loss of coverage and lack of ammo, all while panic reigned as a fire grew larger. Even though these troops were able to coordinate to create a defense against what they believed was an incoming attack, the UGV had them fooled. The Ukrainian assault came from the other side of the complex. So not only does Ukraine have weapons it can use to break through Russian defenses, but it also has weapons it can use to divert attention away from soldiers on the ground. When used in concert with ground forces, UAVs and mortars, Ukraine's explosive-carrying UGVs are a real threat to Russia. They're also a threat because they don't cost much to make. Reuters reports that Yev and Nartok's smaller drones, the ones capable of carrying mines and hiding in tall grass, cost just $812 to make. That money covers every single component, with all being buildable and buyable using the military aid Ukraine has received from its allies. For $1 million, Ukraine could build over 1,230 of these drones. For context, that's about the same amount of money required to build a single Storm Shadow long-range missile. These low costs are true for practically all of the drones Ukraine is using. In Kursk, for example, Ukrainian troops are using small UAVs with grenades attached using cable ties to attack multi-million-dollar targets in the Russian oblast. These drones are remote-controlled and cost just $400 to assemble. Larger drones may cost in the multiple thousands of dollars, but the trend continues. It's far cheaper to assemble a mini army of drones than it is to build a single missile. The risk-to-reward ratio swings massively in Ukraine's favor thanks to these low costs. Returning to Nartok's $812 drone, that would be even cheaper to build, were it not for the war driving up the prices of his components. If before the war a transmitter cost 2,000 hryvnias, which is Ukraine's currency, it now costs up to 12,000. He tells Reuters. Costs multiplying by a factor of 6 is a problem, but the UGVs Ukraine is using are still low-cost options. As for the risk versus reward side of things, sending a fleet of dozens of UGVs to clear out trenches and destroy tanks allows Ukraine to inflict high-cost damage on Russia without risking its people or using the more expensive weapons it's receiving from the West. Therein lies another reason these UGVs are such game changers. They're actively protecting Ukrainian troops. That's the opinion of Ukrainian intelligence chief Kyrylo Budanov, who expects the next phase of the Ukraine war to see the development of far more UGVs. Those drones are going to replace soldiers on the front lines, with those soldiers likely pulling back to help control the drones as they make their way to their targets. Speaking at the Yalta European Strategy Conference in September 2024, Budanov said, "In this calendar year, I think the number of these robot systems will grow immensely in the order of tens. The reason? The human desire not to die." Budanov notes that people are naturally hesitant to go into battle, even if it's in defense of their country. If you can send a drone, 10 drones, or 1 soldier, you'll always choose to send 10 drones, he said during the conference. Perhaps this is a hint at Ukraine's ground-based tactics as the war edges closer to 2025. Though Ukraine hasn't suffered casualties to the same extent as Russia during the war, it's still lost tens of thousands of people. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky put the number at 31,000 dead soldiers in February 2024. The New York Times offered more insight a few months before, placing the number at 17,500 Ukrainian soldiers dead, as part of up to 131,000 casualties. That's about a fifth of the 661,000 casualties Ukraine's Ministry of Finance claims the country has inflicted on Russia. But it's still a substantial number when you remember that Ukraine is a far smaller country with fewer soldiers to call upon. This new wave of UGVs could be the solution to Ukraine's manpower problems. Zelensky and his strategists now have the option of deploying UGVs to support troops on the ground, or in some cases, replace them entirely. Picture a small group of drones, each carrying one of the makeshift hydrogen bombs seen in Vovchansk, destroying Russian fortifications. They're followed up by the same drones sporting machine guns that Ukraine has been using to clear out trenches. These drones have already proven capable of withstanding RPG fire and can rack up Russian kills. The potential exists for Ukraine to inflict serious damage on Russian positions at a low cost, and without risking the lives of soldiers it can preserve for more complex operations. Then there's the multitude of modifications that Ukraine can make to these drones to consider. You've already seen plenty of examples in this video. Ukraine has UGVs capable of carrying mines and makeshift hydrogen bombs. They can equip their drones with automatically firing machine guns, as well as simply using them to survey the surroundings so incoming troops have a better idea of what they're up against. A video posted to Reddit shows even more potential. The 19-second clip appears to show several UGVs mounted with powerful cannons, along with machine gun-toting drones. There are also several that carry no weaponry at all. Instead, they have what appear to be large compartments, suggesting Ukraine is working on converting some of its drones to carry equipment to soldiers on the front lines. Again, that's a massive money saver. Far better to use a drone to carry equipment than an armored vehicle that costs much more to buy and operate. Those same drones can be used as makeshift and mobile stretchers to transport casualties away from the front lines. Again, that's another boon for Ukraine. Its soldiers on the front can keep fighting after loading a wounded comrade onto a UGV rather than having to figure out how to get them out of the firing line themselves. The point here is that the potential is endless. If Ukraine's engineers can imagine it, the odds are that they can accomplish it with a UGV. And the most worrying thing about all of this from Russia's perspective is that Ukraine is well aware of just how effective its ground drones can be. Ukraine is actively testing dozens of new UGV designs. That's according to Radio Free Europe, which spoke to Natalia Kuzhneska of Bravl. A government organization, Bravl exists to steer private inventions toward the Ukrainian military, with Kuzhneska stating that it has accepted over 200 UGV designs as of April 2024. Only a quarter of those designs have been tested, meaning there are around 150 more that could provide Ukraine with even greater battlefield capabilities. These efforts are a small part of the wider Ukrainian effort to invest heavily in drone production. It's already contracted several internal companies to produce 1.5 million drones for its military by the end of 2024. By 2025, President Zelensky claims Ukraine will be able to produce 4 million drones per year. Considering drone production in Ukraine was practically non-existent before Russia's invasion, these sheer numbers show just how effective unmanned vehicles have proven to be in the war. Of course, there are some problems to confront, most of which demonstrate natural weaknesses in Ukraine's UGVs. Most run on tracks or wheels, for instance, which mean they'll face challenges in rougher terrain. There are some places where Ukraine's UGVs simply can't go. In some cases, the country can get around that by deploying UAVs instead. In others, Ukraine will have to send people. It's possible to develop UGVs capable of navigating difficult terrain that's increasingly pockmarked by bomb blasts, but that added utility comes at a cost, meaning Ukraine has to balance its spending with the perceived capabilities of its drones. Still, having the option to deploy UGVs where they can at least gives Ukraine some leeway to decide where to deploy soldiers and where it can send machines to do their jobs. We also can't ignore the fact that Russia has identified the potential of UGVs in the conflict. Radio Free Europe points out that there is footage showing Russia deploying ground drones armed with grenade launchers in Ukraine. Those drones can be countered with UAVs, but the same goes for Ukrainian UGVs, assuming Russia spots them in time. Despite these drawbacks, there's no denying that Ukraine's heavy investment in drones, both aerial and ground-based, represents a brand new terror for Russia. Putin, who has relied on sheer manpower to make gains throughout the war, now has to rely on his strategists to come up with ways to counter what looks set to be an upcoming machine army containing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of drones. That's a tall order for a military whose tactics still seem to be stuck in World War II. But what do you think about Ukraine's new generation of UGVs? Will they prove effective on a wider scale than the isolated uses highlighted in this video? Will Russia come up with adequate countermeasures? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out how Ukraine's paper planes are destroying Russia's military, or click this other video instead.